So, there's this old, kind of cringy announcement video from when I released Moving Box Shooter, a ridiculous behemoth of a game developer's first project, which I am utterly shocked went as well as it did, but that's a story for another time. In that video, I mentioned my plans to make another game about dashing, but look at my itch page and you will notice a distinct lack of such game. The next game was actually about whatever this was. Okay, so what was this dashing game, though, and what happened to it? Well, the project was called Dash Power, and it was one of the many ideas of mine that just didn't work out. However, I did give it my best shot at the time, and it turned out to be such an interesting experiment that I'd like to make a really quick video on it anyway. So, let's briefly go over the project's beginnings. It was likely around the start of 2023, a little before Moving Box Shooter, that I began having an idea for a game about dashing. Originally something kind of like Celeste. I bounced the idea around for a while, and then, at some point, I must have made these segment-based colliders on a whim. They were just Godots built in Line 2D node, but they'd create a collider on runtime, so you could stand on them. Why did I make this? I don't know. But this presented an interesting challenge. How could I get that player to snap to the slope and go around, and build speed, and still be able to collide with walls and... Okay, so I was making a Sonic game now, but never mind that. There were 6 iterations of the idea in total, and each one either polished the last or introduced a totally new way of doing things. My first idea, right off the bat, was to take the player and use a raycast to find the normal of the ground. This vector could then be used as the direction the player moves along. One of the problems, of course, is I'd have to rotate the raycast itself in order to go all the way around, and that changed how it interpreted normals. This went very poorly at first. So I redid everything and got much smoother results next time. Lovely! But hey, wait. Oh no. Walls exist. Okay, so my code was not prepared for this at all. Let's start from the beginning again. Iteration 3 comes along, and with it a lot smoother collision and slope handling, and 2 important new features that you might be able to see in the debug window here. First, ground modes. The player needs to build speed differently depending on the angle of the ground. At first, I had been trying to do this directly using raw trigonometric data, but this proved to be a headache because I was not good at trigonometry. So instead, I sectioned off angular regions to change the way input direction affects speed buildup. Sure, this was a bit of a cheat, but it made things very easy to debug. Second, movement breaking. Now, the funny thing about characters who move really fast is they don't often play nice with collision. Well, easy fix, I just break up that movement. So instead of moving one long distance in one frame and then checking collision, I could break it up into a few smaller distances and check collision after each movement. And I could dynamically scale this based on how fast you're actually moving. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but eventually Iteration 3 has its issues. I move on to Iteration 4. Nothing much to say about this one, it's just a better Iteration 3. But you will notice a lot of debugging. I made certain to keep really simple and robust debugging systems, and that really paid off. It's Iteration 5 where I do something really interesting, because I realized something. When the player is on ground, they're supposed to snap to it. No matter how they move, it must end up on that line. So what if we just stored the points of the line and projected them onto there? All we have to deal with, therefore, is a one-dimensional space, and we can use angle comparisons to figure out what is wall and what is ledge. At first, it was a headache to implement, especially translating from air to ground, but once it got going, things were going. There were no more strange issues from slight imperfections in the ground raycast, because I wasn't using raycasts to stick to the ground. The raycast was only used to realize that ground was there. In Iteration 6, it all came together, and I finally had something that, although still very janky and rough, actually seemed feasible. Things were looking really good. And then I dropped it. Why? Well, mostly because I'd struggled to figure out what I'd do for the art style. At least, that was the reason at the time. Eventually, I got distracted with other things, participated in other game jams, and realized that the project I was trying to undertake, if I tried to do it all on my own, would probably take at least a decade. I'd still be working on it going into my 30s, and the codebase would only get older and more convoluted as time went on, so, you know, I just decided I was happy enough with what I had achieved and moved on. Another failure, yes, but it was a fun failure. Someday I could perceive myself using this old idea again for maybe a really short game. Well, it's super old, messy, and incomplete code that I've barely looked at in years, so I'd probably want to do it again, but for now I'm still working on Dreamscape, a project which, unlike Dash Power, seems far more feasible. It's still going to take time, maybe at least a year, but not as much time as this would've. All I have to debug is this. Imagine debugging and playtesting that. Well, speaking of which, I have a game to work on, so if you've watched this far, thank you. I hope you found this video interesting. And please, have yourself an exceptionally lovely day. Bye-bye.